Welcome to Missing Persons Uncovered. I'm Caroline Humer, a child protection expert, and in this podcast series, we seek to understand the complexities of a global issue. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people go missing worldwide.
I'm Cheryl, and I carry out research into missing persons at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. Across this series, Caroline and I are talking to professionals to share insights into how we can all be more aware and take actions to protect vulnerable people in our communities and families from going missing.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Missing Persons Uncovered. Today we have with us Cheryl Alsop. And Cheryl, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you get to do what you do, and a little bit more about what is it that you do?
So I'm Cheryl. I'm a senior lecturer in criminology and criminal justice at the University of South Wales. My research and my teaching centres around major crime investigations, missing people and the various harms that can come to missing people, and cold case investigations. My PhD was in cold case investigations and how the police seek to solve long-term unsolved cases, the kinds of expertise that they use. I do research around missing people and missing people considered murdered to look at can we improve these investigations. I'm also a trustee with Locate International, which is a charity dedicated to supporting families look for their missing loved ones.
So let's dive right into it. What is a cold case?
And that's a really interesting question, in that there's no prescribed definition of what a cold case is for, be it homicide, missing person, stranger rape. It tends to be when the investigating officer thinks there's nothing further we can do in this investigation. There's no more lines of inquiry to follow, and we simply don't know what's happened to this person. You've not really got a set time when a case will go cold, but of course, a long-term missing person, you considered a long-term missing person after 12 months. Part of the issue with defining what a cold case missing person investigation is very much like you've been talking about before in the definition of what is missing, which then makes it difficult to define what is long-term missing. You probably get more of a definition around if someone's missing and you think they've come to harm. So you've then got potentially a cold case, no body murder. Still, there's no prescribed definition. It is simply, we don't know what's happened here. We don't know who's responsible for this crime. We've run out of leads. So it's unresolved or undetected, which sounds very sort of vague, but that's the reality of these definitions.
I think people might be surprised by it because we hear a lot this term in movies, in books, and I would assume people just take it as a given that this is what it means. Are there unique characteristics that you've come across of a cold case, or is it simply the fact that an investigator kind of reaches the end of all the leads and kind of the trail has gone cold?
That's broadly it. Yes, you're doing your investigation, you've explored every avenue you can, and there's nothing further you can do. There might be instances where you perhaps can't prove something. You may have got enough information, or you feel you've got enough information, but you can't prove it, so therefore it's unresolved. And there are cases like that where you draw a blank. You've also got to think about, just thinking about the definition of a cold case. If a missing person hasn't been reported, 5 years later, then you realise they're missing, so you start looking for them. Is that a cold case because it's taken you 5 years to report it and you start looking for them? Or is it a live case, brand new, because it has today been reported to you to start investigating it? You've got those sorts of difficulties. And there's been cases where bodies have been found before they knew the person was missing or before they knew what had happened. So again, when does it become cold? Is it from time of reporting, we can't find this person, therefore it's gone cold? Or actually, how long has this person been reported missing? Or how long has this person been missing before they were reported missing? So you've got a few complexities around that, and not all missing people who go missing are reported missing. And some missing people, they might be considered missing to their family, but they don't consider themselves missing. And it's only when something happens further down the line that maybe an investigation will take place. So that adds to the complexity of a cold case.
The next question I have is really from an international perspective, is Are there differences in how different countries approach this term to begin with? Is there different terminologies in different countries, or is it generally the same issue around the world?
I can't speak universally, but broadly, they seem to be the same sorts of definitions that we have drawn a blank in our investigation. We've gone as far as we can go. We don't know where else to go in this investigation. We'll keep it open pending new lines of inquiry, pending new information coming in, pending the person being found. But broadly, it does seem to be that most have this definition around, we've done all we can to find this person, we can't find them. It then starts to go cold.
Is there an estimate, or is there statistics to say how many cases in the UK, for example, are cold cases?
Broadly, we've got just over 5,000 cold case missing people in the UK, so long-term missing people. Most missing people come home. 3/4 of those reported missing come back within a day, around 85% within a couple of days. There's only about 1% every year that are still outstanding after 12 months. We have now, like I say, around 5,000 missing people, but that's families of 5,000 people who want to know what's happened to their loved one. It's a small proportion of the huge number of people reported missing, but it's those families that want answers. We've also got on the other side of the coin, and also sort of cold cases linked to missing people, are those unidentified found remains. So where a body or a body part has been found that we can't name that person, we don't know who it is. And there are around 1,100 of those that actually, if you can identify that body or those remains, you've detected a cold case missing person potentially. And like I say, again, in the UK, there's around 1,100 of those as well. And there are some, we have not a huge amount, but people who are found, but they don't know who they are. They're alive, but they don't know who they are. And again, there's around 60 of those people. So again, there's different complexities to the type of cold case in terms of understanding what they are and how many they are of them.
Those 60 individuals, is that cases of amnesia or severe dementia or anything like that? Or what's the cause where they don't know who they are?
I think it's a combination of those kinds of things. Some of them, I think, are babies as well, which is another layer of complexity to it.
I want to highlight for people, I think, because it's a really great opportunity for us to raise awareness of the scheme that the National Crime Agency has of identifying remains. Is there anything you can tell us briefly about how that works and how people can find more information about that?
The National Crime Agency have a department called the Missing People Bureau that have a website. On that website, they have details of these unidentified found remains. They will only publicise ones where there's perhaps a story to be told with those remains. So you might have clothing or artefacts or something with them. And they will put on images of those items, images of the people, the remains that they want to be able to identify. And they want the public to look at them and see, well, could that be somebody I know? Is that my missing loved one? People can put information onto that website if they believe they know something about that missing person, and they're all on there. You can search the database. So if you have a missing person that you think could be found remains, you can search the database. You can look around. If they've got an idea of gender, age, it's listed on the website. So it gives people the opportunity to search that database and provide information if they're able to help in any of those investigations. And of course, the Missing People Bureau also have details of long-term missing people, so there should be the cross-matching of the two. And there has been within policing a couple of operations, if you like, where they've done a concerted effort at trying to cross-match unidentified found remains with long-term missing people to be able to close those cold cases, those missing people cold cases, because now you've found that person.
Do we know internationally how many cold cases there are roughly?
I don't, largely because it's not recorded in many places. So finding that answer is quite difficult. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier about definitions and understanding the missing complexity. But I think it's quite difficult to find. Either it isn't recorded or it's just difficult to find.
Let's think about what should and shouldn't happen when a case goes cold, what the process then. So an investigator reaches a point where they're in charge of an investigation, they run out of leads, they feel the case has gone cold. Let's start with what should happen. What then are the policies or the expectations?
So you've got different policies in terms of long-term missing and then further down the line, cold case missing. So in long-term missing cases, there should be a period of reviews to review, has everything done that should be done? Have they, followed various procedures and guidance? They should be doing them after 28 days initially, and then after 3 months if the person has still not been found, then after 6 months, and then 12 months, and then annually thereafter, because that gives time for new information to come to light, the person coming forward. And of course, if within those timeframes new information does come to light, that should trigger an immediate review. As you go further into it, the longer the person is missing, then a review process depends on the case, the circumstances of the case, the complexities of the case. And again, that goes back to what I said before about if they consider that this person is missing and likely have come to harm and hasn't been found after 12 months and longer, it may well fall under the unsolved murder, potential no body murder review process, have more formal reviews there. But the idea between these reviews, the 28-day review, the 3 months, the 6 months, the annual review, is to try and prevent them going cold, to look for these new lines of inquiry, these new leads that might help progress it. But then as a cold case, you're looking for, are people available that might have seen something or heard something? Recognizing the longer you go on, the longer they've been missing, the more faded people's memories are. It becomes harder to remember what you know about a particular case. But they'll look at the complexities of that case. They'll think about maybe the profile of the case. We know of high profile cases that continues to get reviewed very, very regularly. And I suppose it's thinking about what's already been done and what else could be done. Are there other lines of inquiry you could follow? It also depends, and this will be the case not just in the UK, but it depends on the resources available. How much resource have you got to look at your cold case missing people? Have you got a team in place that can do this, that are doing reviews more broadly anyway, and can do this as part of it? Balancing, has this person come to harm? Or might they have chosen to go missing? So weighing up a lot of decisions before deciding on what else to do, the longer the case remains cold.
Is there a difference in the expectation, for example, between missing children and missing adults, or is it generally across the board the same?
I think it's thinking about why a person has gone missing. An adult can choose to go missing. They can go of their own volition and they have the right to do that. So you're weighing up, have they chosen to go missing? Or have they come to harm? When you're thinking about a child, it's less likely they've chosen to go missing. And if they have, it's not perhaps a well thought through decision to go missing, and they need to be found. So you've got those different complexities there in thinking about what's happened to the child, what's happened to the adult. Have they likely come to harm? If you think adult or child is likely to come to harm, you want to review that case more frequently. You want to find out what's happened to them. You want to find out if they have come to harm, at whose hands have they come to harm? Because you may well have got a dangerous offender out there, someone who could be doing this to other people. With both adults and children, you've got families who want to know what's happened and want their loved one back. So again, it's thinking about the whole thing of the case as to what's happened to this person. Have they come to harm? Have they chosen to leave? High profile cases, adults and children, you perhaps get a little bit more attention on missing children potentially, so you'll get more resource put into those kinds of cases. It is a challenge balancing it, isn't it, and deciding which case have that very limited amount of resources in terms of money and people to investigate these cases.
I just want to highlight that when we talk about come to harm, it's not always due to violence or crime. People may come to harm because of self-harm or suicide. They can come to harm because of an accident. So there's a variety of different forms of harm.
The people, like you said, they could be murdered, they could have committed suicide, they could have been exploited, and there were links to exploitation, modern slavery. They might still be alive, they're missing, but been caught up in some form of exploitation or modern slavery, so they're not known to others. There's been cases, predominantly from America, where there's been people who've been abducted, and have been locked in people's homes for many years that have suddenly been found. So there are all sorts of harms that you have to think about in terms of what's happened to these people.
And are there things that shouldn't happen when a case goes cold that you would say, definitely don't do that if you're an investigator?
That's a hard one to answer because, again, it depends on the circumstances of the case, doesn't it? And the complexities of the case. I mean, I suppose the key thing is, like with any of these sorts of investigations, it's keeping an open mind, assuming nothing, believing nothing, and check and challenging everything. And certainly with a cold case, if you've had an investigation and you're reviewing that cold case, it's still keeping that open mind, not necessarily assuming that what's documented is what's happened, that if something isn't documented, it hasn't been done, because people doing the investigation at the time were working with what they knew at the time. So it's not making assumptions, it's not thinking that everything is there, we've got all the documentation, we've asked all these questions, we've spoken to all these people. That might not have happened. So it's that, don't assume anything, don't believe everything, check and challenge it all, and make sure that you can verify the sources of information you've got. That if there's been a sighting, for example, can you verify that sighting? How have things been verified? Has an inquiry been closed down before it should have been closed down? And, you know, so again, it's having that fresh pair of eyes, that fresh perspective.
Are there any examples you can share with us about cases that have been solved after going cold and it led to a resolution?
There's been a few, and again, it goes back to when harm has happened to the person, that's how they've been solved. I mentioned to you before about the police operations looking at unidentified found remains to cross-match with missing people. And there was one where the Missing People Bureau that we spoke about earlier, collaborating with police forces to look at unidentified found remains, actually solved 15 cases doing that. Identifying the unidentified found remains, they then solved the missing people case. And in terms of some cold cases, there's a case in the UK that was quite an unusual case, in that this was a lady who, she was a very independent lady. She lived alone. She was in a relationship with somebody, and she travelled a lot, and she was planning to travel. She was planning to go abroad for a holiday, but was due to come back. She left her dog with a neighbour, and off she went, and she was never seen since. But she wasn't reported missing at this point. And actually, it was money was going out of her bank account, and a bank official got suspicious as to where this signature doesn't look right on this case. They started to investigate what was a potential fraud. And then the police realised, hang on, we've not seen this lady. Where is she? And when they started to investigate what's happened to her, when was she last seen? And it's unusual that she'd leave her dog, her bank account, she was still paying a direct debit, she was still paying for her home insurance and various things. So she's not planning on leaving because she's still paying for things back in this country. And they started to look at, well, where should she have gone? And they realised she was due to go to France, as we'd said. When they investigated the ferry that she was due to be on, they discovered she never got on that ferry, and neither did the partner she was supposed to go with. This partner had been sending notes to her parents saying, I've got a job abroad, I'm staying abroad, I'm going to live abroad. And because that was it wasn't necessarily out of character, they took that at face value. But as time went on and her parents became ill and both died, and she didn't go to either funeral, you start to realise something's amiss. So for the police, it was investigating, first of all, was she alive or dead? And then what's happened to her? A body still hasn't been found there, but they convicted her partner. They were able to show that he'd been drawing money out of her account, been drawing money out of her father's account, that obviously accounts that he'd given, they could disprove them based on, for example, not getting on the ferry, where money had come from. So quite a different, going back to before saying, when is it a cold case? Well, actually, she'd been missing far longer than actually you realise she's missing. There was a case back in the 1980s of a young girl who, she went missing from a care home aged 15. And for various reasons, her missing status dropped off the missing database. So she wasn't properly investigated at that time. And again, things like that happen. Some 6-7 years later, a body was found wrapped in carpets, and workmen found a body. They started to try and, could we identify these remains? And they did a facial reconstruction of the remains. And when the facial reconstruction went out onto national television, 2 social workers said, oh, that is this missing person, Karen, who went missing 6-7 years ago. And they were able to get a profile from the remains that matched the profile composite profile of her parents. So they were able to identify her and then also bring the offenders to justice with an investigation. There are opportunities that people can do. Even things like a long-term review of a missing person. This was a lady who it looked like money went missing, things had gone from her house, there was a bit of upheaval at her house. The case was reviewed, it was flagged as a long-term missing person case. Various indicators were put on, including at the health centre. If you move areas, if you move from England to Wales or wherever, your doctor's notes get transferred to your new doctor's practice. So this lady had gone missing, didn't know what happened to her, but they put a flag on. If another health board requests her doctor's notes, let us know. And that's what happened. Eventually, a request came in for her doctor's notes. Then they were able to identify her, find that she was there, and she'd gone to make a new life for herself. There are simple ways and complicated ways of doing it. And there's been cases where there's been all sorts of problems with the initial investigation that meant it's gone cold. A child of 15 going missing was logged on the police database as being 45. So you get a completely different response as a vulnerable 15-year-old going missing or a 45-year-old woman. But they were able to investigate some 6-7 years later. They had a suspect in mind. They used covert operations to work out if he was on his own or working with another person. They had forensic evidence from when the victim had been in his property. And there were a few red flags as well, in that this person had reported her missing. Reported to the police that she kept turning up at his house. So almost like testing out what would happen if it was reported she kept turning up at his house, but also providing a little bit of an alibi to say, well, I told you she kept turning up at my house. That's why you found her DNA here. But he wouldn't let them in the house when they wanted to come and talk to him. There was evidence of cleaning in the house. Those red flags. And then they found some forensic evidence in there. And then again, because there were two people involved, the second party who helped move the body talked about it. Somebody overheard that conversation. You often get those elements of chance that help when you are investigating these kinds of things. There are quite a few cases where they do have that level of success in different ways. There are different things that can help these kind of cases.
We talked about quite a variety of ways to solve cold cases. Do you see from your experience any patterns of what helps solve these cases? Are there things that are common in kind of leading to progression or leading to a resolution? Or is it totally dependent on the case itself?
A bit of both. I mean, of course, it's dependent on the case, the circumstances, and what's available in a case. One of the things I would almost definitely say with any cold case investigations, it's the tenacity of the people leading that investigation. It's the tenacity of the investigating officer pushing to get a result, not giving up on it, fighting for resources. That's usually the big stand or fail on that. And having that professional curiosity, what's out of character, and probing a bit more about this out of character when somebody goes missing. Thinking about if someone's come to harm, for example, the person reporting them missing might be the person who's caused that harm. You've got to think about probing a bit more about their account of as to what's happened. And then again, going back to thinking about, in the case, what do we know? What are the things that can help us unravel? Because people can choose to go missing and might not want to be found. And again, you've got to balance that up around, do they want to be found? What are the circumstances of them going missing? And really just following all those lines of inquiry and having that tenacity to go explore all of these leads and properly thinking about what will work and what won't work. Perhaps understanding a bit of they call it victimology in UK policing, but understanding the person, their life, their lifestyle, their routines, the people within it, their family, their friends, their associates, their behaviours, and looking for what's out of the ordinary within all of that might help explain what might have happened to this person. It might explain why they've chosen to disappear. It might explain why they've come to harm.
From your experience, what do you think are the main challenges for investigators in dealing with these cases? Because time has passed, inevitably. A case that will go cold, it might be different time frames, but time would have passed. By definition, they're not straightforward cases, otherwise they would have been resolved probably. What are the main challenges for officers when they take on a case like this?
There are a lot of challenges. There's obviously the one I mentioned before, the challenge of balancing what are very intrusive inquiries with the right to a person's private life, with understanding have they come to harm and wanting to address that harm. That's quite challenging to get that balance right. Resources is always a challenge. You can only do as much as the resources will be, the people you have, the money you've got, the techniques and expertise you can draw on. What was done at the time originally, how good, how thorough was the original investigation? Have they retained the documentation? Because if you've got no documentation, you can't find key things. It becomes difficult to start to recreate your case again. A lot of cold case missing people investigations rely on passive data. So CCTV cameras, financial records, all of those kinds of things that, again, you might not have been available at the time of the original investigation, and certainly might not be available now to be able to help you with that kind of case. Forensic evidence is often pivotal in a cold case murder investigation, for example. But of course, if a person is missing, you haven't got that forensic evidence. So where do you begin? In a cold case murder or in a murder investigation more broadly, you've got a body, so you've got forensics, potential cameras nearby, potential witnesses nearby. In a missing person, what have you got? You don't know, you can work out from witness accounts where they were last seen, when they were last seen, who they last spoke to on the phone potentially. But then you've got to try and work out everything else, haven't you? Where did they go? Who did they speak to? You might have CCTV, you might have their mobile phone record, depends how old the case is, but you might not. So where do you go next? You've got to think about who is still available that might help in this investigation, speaking to families, speaking to friends. What can people remember? You can do nowadays, you've got obviously social media and other media appeals. But again, if you think someone went missing 10 years ago and you're doing an appeal, I look very different now than I did 10 years ago. So how helpful is that, putting that appeal out? And again, right back to that first challenge I spoke about, your human right to go missing, and suddenly your face is on social media. We're looking for you, and actually you don't want to be found. There might be a very good reason why you've chosen to go missing. You've got to weigh up all of those sorts of complexities. There are expertise you can draw on, but there's also limitations because of the passage of time and the complexities of the case, I think.
Tell us a bit about Locate International. What is it and what do you do?
Locate International is a charity dedicated to helping families find their missing person. It's entirely volunteer run. So we have student volunteers, we have volunteers from all walks of life who want to help in missing people investigations. So it's looking for missing people. It's also looking at trying to identify unidentified found remains to try and cross-match that with your missing people. But it's also about trying to put research into practice that might help in missing people investigations. So taking a more holistic view. Our chair of the board of trustees is Charlie Hedges, who has done one of your podcasts before, an expert in missing people. He's got his own consultancy, he's worked in missing people investigations for many, many years. Our CEO, Dave Brimstead, he was a senior investigating officer and worked on missing people cases investigations. And that's why he set up Locate International, because of this passion to help people find missing people. Our patron is Dame Professor Sue Black, who you'll know with her work, again, on trying to identify remains and bodies to help put a name to a loved one. So that's what the charity is all about. It's about trying to, help families of missing people find their loved one, and to think about, has everything done that can be done?
So the name International, I'll zoom in a bit about that. Do you look at cases outside of the UK? Is it just for UK citizens that have gone missing, be it in the UK or internationally, or can listeners from around the world contact the charity? How does it work?
Well, interestingly, it's predominantly UK based, of course, but we have been doing some work on some international cases. I think there's going to be a television documentary coming out in due course about one of these international unidentified found remain cases. Some of our student volunteers have been working on international cold cases through a programme with the Police Academy of Germany, where we've worked on some of their cold case investigations with them. So there has been some crossover with international cases, and we helped work on a case that involved a case the UK and France. There are some overlap. It is predominantly UK based, but that doesn't preclude international, but our resources, of course, are much more UK based than they are international.
If a family member from a different country would like to approach you asking for help, they can?
Yeah, just through the Locate website. It's all available there. It tells you how we work, how to ask for help. They can just follow the instructions on screen. Absolutely.
Is there any takeaways that you would like members of the public, families, as well as professionals to be aware of in kind of this realm?
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. There are families living in limbo who don't know what's happened to their loved one, who may be missing a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. They want to know what's happened to their loved one. They want to know that everything is done that can be done. They want to know that people are still looking for their loved one. And I think it's important to know that they can push to have a cold case review, to look into their missing loved one, that is something they can do. But there's also that balance as well. And I think from a professional point of view, they need to think about those families living in limbo. But also there are families who have found a way to live with that person being missing. And actually they don't want to add to their trauma in revisiting it. They don't necessarily want a review because actually it's revisiting a trauma that they're trying to live with. So I suppose it's thinking about the families, thinking about the missing person and what's the right thing to do, what's the best thing to do, and thinking about the missing person themselves. Could they be distressed by looking for them, but equally they may be missing, wanting to be found, doing everything we can to find them? It's a real challenge to do that. Has someone chose to go missing? Has someone come to harm? Do we need to look for this person? What are their human rights? What do the families need to know? And if someone has chosen to go missing, they can tell the police, they can tell the charity Missing People that they've chosen to go missing, and they can say, you can let my family know I'm okay, but I don't want them to know where I am. So you can do that as well. If you're a missing person who doesn't want to be found, but you want your family to know you're okay, they can do that too.
So thank you very much, Cheryl. That's been really interesting. People can look at the resources that we talked about, and hopefully this is why we do what we do, with the hope to help people out there and to give some answers really to families.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Missing Persons Uncovered, and thank you, Cheryl, also for explaining how nuanced and complex cold cases can be.
If you have any questions you would like us to answer or thoughts on topics you would like us to discuss, please contact us through our website. If you'd like specific information or need help, please reach out to your local police department or national charity. If you are enjoying this podcast and discussion, please help support us by buying us a coffee through missingpersonsuncovered.com. I'm Karen Shalev.
And I'm Caroline Humer. Thank you for listening. Join us next time when we talk to Missing Children Europe and Child Focus about missing migrant children in Europe.